hear nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on.
Well, if they were not in love, they sure made it seem like they were. That's the point, though, of acting, to perform your role realistically, so the audience can immerse themselves in the storyline and escape from reality for a while. Fred was very critical, very self-depreciating of his acting skills, and for the most part he would play the straight or comedic roles in their movies. Not when dancing. There he was lord and master of his environment. Yet when finally called upon to play the role of the devastated lover in their finest, most passionate movie, Swing Time, and again when facing losing his beloved wife in the Barclays of Broadway, he met the challenge, and his acting was emotional and sincere. Ginger could not dance as well as Fred, or even some of his other partners over the years, but she sure could act. Her expressive face and wide range of emotions, from furious to sweet and fragile, carried much of the storylines. Eventually she won Oscar Best Actress. She could be that good. And reviewing her numerous great movies proves her skills. There was just such great chemistry between the two. So good, much of the viewing audience believed they were in love. And not just on the set. You see them in public appearances, and again the chemistry is there, even years later.
And now, if the gentlemen of the orchestra will turn to their arrangement, we want to play on the undisputed king and queen of Hollywood musicals, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire.
We're here to present the awards to the screenwriters for the best screenplay. Oh, excuse me, Fred. Based.
Oh boy, my baby.
They truly seem to like each other. But then again, they are professionals, and this was just another show. What is the truth between them? A lot is written about this, but if anybody says they know for sure, that is foolish. What I am presenting here is my informed opinion, based on serious research. But it is just an opinion. The source for this discussion is their two biographies. As I have found typical of these books, everyone has different memories of events. Making it even harder to understand, Fred, as was his way, downplays almost all serious issues, and does not have that much to say about Ginger. Written just a few years after the loss of his beloved wife in 1954, I believe respect for her and never being one to publicly discuss personal matters until near the end of his life is why he has so little to say. Ginger's bio is a different matter. Originally 1,500 pages long, it was cut down to around 400 pages, still very large for most actor bios. Written at the end of her life, she does occasionally make factual mistakes. How well would you remember 60 years ago? Or even yesterday? At times, Ginger just gushes about Fred, spending pages on their first date alone. Every once in a while she tells of conflict with Fred, especially the infamous ostrich feather dress episode from the cheek-to-cheek dance in Top Hat. Also take into account statements they made in interviews. Altogether, Ginger is very supportive of Fred, even when talking about an issue justifying Fred's rationale, even if she did not agree. In the end, if you take Fred's sparse comments and Ginger's occasionally more detailed statements, and read what to me is obviously between the lines, they were lovers at the start of their relationship, and then friends for life. I have created this ahead of my original planning because I want this to be ready. My videos can take a while to, if they are good, get the traction to appear high in search lists. I hope this is good enough to do that. For years there has been announcements about 2 upcoming Fred and Ginger biopics. The most mentioned, starring Jamie Bell of Billy Elliot fame and Margaret Qualley, has had news articles since at least 2020. The latest I can easily find are from 2023, so maybe nothing will ever come of these. This has me worried. Hollywood has a long, shameful history of little regard for the truth if it gets in the way of a juicy story, and even less if it destroys someone's reputation. There are several quotes causing my concern. The worst. In truth, much of the drama in the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers film will be based on rumors or completely made up. While there was speculation that the 2 were having an affair, there was never any proof, and both denied it emphatically. I cover the same subject here, but with an attempted loving hand. I am a huge fan of these 2, both in their public and private lives. The available info is quite often contradictory. There are subjects neither say much about, following their beliefs in discretion and privacy, but sometimes enough is said to maybe read between the lines. Here, I attempt to do just that, and hopefully I make it clear enough that I am conjecturing, not stating proven facts. Worse, in reviewing the written and video information about these 2, it is obvious to me outside agendas come into play. I do not understand this world much anymore, with some studios putting out agenda-driven bomb after bomb, very upsetting, especially when children are the target. Fred is mostly immune to this, with the only nasty statements being about his blackface dance in Swing Time's Bojangle of Harlem. I cover this in depth in its own video. Fred was a friend and supporter of Bill Bojangles Robinson. This was an homage. Ginger has 4 groups that, to differing degrees, attack her reputation. On the lighter side, fans of other great female dancers, and some professional dancers, harshly criticize her dancing. Worse, some viciously attack Ginger for her movie Lady in the Dark, because the play's subject matter was changed in the movie, as so often happened, because the play was too risque, especially during the Code era. The absolute worst, though, is because Ginger, and even more, her mother Leela, were involved in the blacklisting period. At some point I will cover this, not here. The history of this time is now so distorted. All this is why Ginger becomes so defensive later in her life, and you can see it in some of her interviews. I dread turning on this future movie and seeing Ginger portrayed poorly, unfairly, even viciously. There is big money and agendas to push in sensationalist works. Because of all this video is very comprehensive, attempting to cover all issues regarding their relationship. Maybe too long for your taste. But if the movie does finally come out, and it trashes one or both of them, come back here for as fair an analysis, with conjectures, as I could possibly do. By 1930, Fred and Adele were top stars on Broadway. Their first smash hit, Lady Be Good, in 1924, was also the first play where the Gershwins created the entire score. After that, they did the Gershwins' Funny Face, another big hit. Fred and George were actually friends since 1913, when 14-year-old Fred was on vaudeville and 15-year-old George was a song plugger, salesman-performers who played songs to sell them. George said, "Wouldn't it be great if I could write a musical show and you could be in it?" A decade later, their silly dreams came true. Now the Gershwins were putting together another hit play, Girl Crazy, starring a fairly unknown new star, 19-year-old Ginger Rogers. Ginger started in vaudeville when she was 14, after winning the Texas Charleston Dance Championship, and almost immediately hit the big-time vaudeville Orpheum circuit. Her mother and manager, Leela, kept her from the New York circuit until she was ready. Once she arrived in New York, her career skyrocketed, and in every direction. In short order, besides vaudeville, she starred in short movies, had a big part in the successful Broadway play Top Speed, and then a 7-year movie contract with Paramount. And now, the lead in a big-time Gershwin play. Ginger writes of attending a pre-production dinner party held by the Gershwins. George called Ginger to sit beside him at the piano as he played new songs written especially for her, the sweetly somber But Not For Me, and then the great Embraceable You. She was on top of the world. Fred was brought into Girl Crazy as a choreography advisor, the first meeting of Fred and Ginger. About their first meeting, Ginger said, "I was from Texas. I had never heard of Fred Astaire, and so it didn't mean anything to me. That's why I guess I had so much fun." And then adds, after explaining she was understandably overwhelmed at the time, "I honestly didn't think of him again." Fred said, "I enjoyed my work with this very attractive and talented new little Texan." Forgive me, I can't find the source here. Ginger's dance partner was struggling with the changes Fred was making in their routine, so he took Ginger in his arms to demonstrate the moves. Someone there said right away their dancing together was magical. All these biographies have different takes on events. Neither Fred nor Ginger mention who put them together for this choreography help. Lucille Ball says it was George Gershwin, their mutual close friend. Was the rascally George playing matchmaker? I can just imagine him teasing the notoriously shy Fred. "You call yet?" A while later, Fred called to ask Ginger out on a date. Ginger devotes 3 pages in her biography to this story, including, in detail, what they said on the phone, to what they both wore, and what a wonderful night it was. They went to Casino in the Park, in Central Park. Ginger says, "The casino was indeed a charming place for a quiet rendezvous, and was perfect for a romantic dinner for 2. Ginger goes on to gush about her first date, talking and dancing with Fred. In 1976, Ginger said about Fred, "I adored the man. I always have adored him. It was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me, being teamed with Fred. He was everything a little starry-eyed girl from a small town ever dreamed of." Ginger tells how band leader Eddie Duncan commented, forecasting the future, "Fred, you and Ginger really look good together." Ginger exclaims, "I felt as though I could have danced all night." And then Ginger writes, "Inside the car, Fred had me in his arms, and the kiss that we shared in that 5 minutes would never had passed the Hays office code." This is the period neither have much to say about their dating, and why some claim they didn't really date. If you read only Ginger's bio, that's the take. Her only reference to subsequent dates was in referring to their date story as their first date, not their only date. Fred does not say much, but the little he does say fills in this period. In his bio, Fred explained his choreography help for Girl Crazy and meeting Ginger in a few paragraphs. He said she was the talk of the town when she opened in the play. In the next paragraph, he wrote, "Ginger and I went out occasionally after that, to a nightclub or a movie. Our favorite spot was Casino in the Park. We danced now and then for fun, with no plans whatsoever of working together." Like I said, the king of understatement, especially when talking about private matters. Ginger spent pages on the first date. Fred covered their entire dating period in 1 paragraph. But notice he did say the Casino in the Park was their favorite spot. It takes a number of dates for something to become their favorite. Not to belabor the obvious, but if 2 people dating kiss passionately on their first date, what do they do after that? Shake hands? Fred makes it sound like they were just buddies, but so soon after his wife's passing, in a bio that in many ways is an homage to her, no way he's going to talk about romancing another woman. Fred makes no references in the book to his dating anyone else besides Ginger. Dating Ginger had to be difficult because of her relentless drive to succeed. Ginger tells a story in her bio about her insane work schedule. Through the entire early part of her career, she never stopped working, barely had time for anything but work. Ginger got up at 6 a.m. to arrive at Paramount Studios in Brooklyn to do her 6th movie or short for the studio, Honor Among Lovers, her 9th movie or short altogether. She left the studio at 6 p.m. to rush to the Albin Theater on Broadway to do Girl Crazy at 8 p.m., 6 evenings a week, plus matinees. At 11 p.m., when the show ended, she went next door to the Blue Angel to do a nightclub act. She got home at 1 a.m. So, how does her non-boyfriend get to spend time with her? She must have been exhausted half the time. Neither were party animals, so clubs were great for the dancing, but otherwise. Later on in his bio, Fred, in explaining how he was already friends with Ginger's mother Leela, wrote, "I had often visited with Ginger and Leela at their apartment. We would sit around chatting, discussing careers, theater business, and so on. Often visited." Fred was no fool. Not a bad idea to get in with the mother, especially a mother so close to her daughter. Ginger was offered a 3-movie deal by RKO, movies to be filmed in Hollywood. The first movie, The Tip-Off, was a perfect role for Ginger to highlight some of her talents. She managed to get out of her Paramount contract and prepared to leave. Here she resumes discussing her relationship with Fred. Ginger's frequent escort at this time was Leela's friend Harold Ross, founder and editor of the New Yorker magazine. Ginger says Harold had a crush on her, but always behaved properly, adding, "He was my pal, and I welcomed his company." Harold took Ginger to see the Bandwagon, and she recounts the wonderful experience in detail. The Bandwagon was a sheer delight. Dancing in the Dark was a romantic vignette danced by Fred and Tilly Losh. Fred and Tilly blazed the trail for Fred and me, and I just sat there enraptured with the joy his dancing brought to my eyes and heart, adding, "But Adele was the crowd pleaser." Ginger and Harold went to Fred's dressing room to congratulate him and asked if he wanted to join them out that evening, but Fred could not. Adele burst into the room, hugged Harold, said hello to Ginger. Just as quick she said her goodbyes, including saying to Ginger, "Goodbye, whoever you are." I really doubt Adele had never heard of the star of the long-running Broadway hit Just Down the Block, who had also dated her brother several times. Many families have odd dynamics. Later, Adele and her mother, Anne, did not want Fred to marry his wife. Fred's wife, Phyllis, did have an offsetting personality that rubbed many the wrong way, but Fred loved her, even loved her flaws. Neither attended Fred's second marriage, and what happened at the end of Fred's life indicated maybe they were right. Or maybe nobody was good enough for their Fred, and Adele was letting Ginger know that. A few days later, Fred and Ginger met again at a party, and this time had time to talk. Ginger said, "Fred, I cannot begin to tell you what a delight your dancing is to these hungry eyes, witnessing such perfection." Soon Ginger was off to Hollywood. Wrapping up this period, Ginger wrote, "If I had stayed in New York, I think Fred Astaire and I might have become a more serious item. We were different in some ways, but alike in others. Both of us were troopers from an early age. Both of us loved a good time, and, for sure, both of us loved to dance." After a lifetime of failed relationships, a few times Ginger muses about a few men where, if things were different, she might have found true, lasting love. For those who deny they dated seriously at this time, if they did not, then what could Ginger possibly mean by this statement? They had one date. A year later she headed off to Hollywood. But if she had stayed, they might have become very serious? Really? No, this has to mean they dated fairly seriously, to muse what might have been if it had continued longer. Ginger and Leela were accompanied on the train ride to Hollywood by Harold Ross. On the first night there, Ross took them to a party where Ginger met many Hollywood celebrities, but she adds not the one she really wanted to meet, Lou Ayres. If Fred and Ginger were in a romance, I could be very wrong here, but if they were, Fred was always competing with Ginger's imaginary lover. Ginger's love life was a mess, very sad, and hard to understand, but that is a subject for another time. But here, the entire time she was dating Fred, she was in love with a man she never met. In 1930, Ginger went to see All Quiet on the Western Front, a blockbuster that year, and in retrospect, highly acclaimed. Ginger wrote in her bio, "I fell head over heels in love, then and there, with the picture's leading man, Lou Ayres." This moment would affect her the rest of her life. In her bio, Ginger had a tendency to state a fact and then leave it hanging there, without full context, leaving one to try to understand why she mentions it. She wrote Fred sent her a lovely letter, but she did not respond, claiming she was terrible at personal correspondence. This was not a letter from just anyone, but from the man she had been dating, at least to some degree, for around a year. I think she includes this because this was when she ended it with Fred. In the summer of 1931, Fred met the love of his life, Phyllis Potter, formerly Phyllis Livingston Baker, a recent divorcee. About their first meeting, Fred said, "I was fascinated by Phyllis. Her exceptional, fragile beauty and gentle charm held me rather spellbound." They started dating immediately. After around 2 years of dating, in 1933, Fred signed the contract to do Flying Down to Rio, and again asked Phyllis to marry him. Again she was hesitant. Fred said he would go to Hollywood to do that first movie, and then they will get married. Phyllis said, "No, that's not good. If you go away from me to Hollywood, you'll start running around with some of those girls out there, and whether you do or not, I'd always think you did, so we'd better get married right now, as soon as possible." They were married July 12, 1933. When Fred recounts what Phyllis would say, he always seems to think it was wonderful. But for this reader, and I assume many others, some of these quotes are alarming. This is one of those. She is admitting she is very jealous and insecure. But all that matters is what Fred thought, and to him she was perfect. Time would prove her jealousy and insecurity would become a real problem early in his partnership with Ginger, at least according to Ginger, but Fred never mentions any of those things. What makes this odd at first is just before this, Phyllis had gone away for months to visit relatives in South Carolina, leaving Fred alone in New York City with all those actresses around him. That did not seem to bother her. The only difference between Broadway and Hollywood was that Ginger was in Hollywood. From all I have read, Fred is always a very honorable man. I assume at some point he was asked about his relationship with Ginger, and he told Phyllis the truth, if possibly a toned-down version. He had dated Ginger for a while. While I view some of the cute actions by Phyllis Fred describes, and the more troublesome Ginger describes, in a very negative light, I also have some pity on poor Phyllis with what occurred over time. She seems jealous and insecure. Many people are. And a big reason for this, Ginger would end up spending endless hours with her husband, pretending to be madly in love with her husband, dancing close with her husband, hugging her husband, even kissing her husband. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We all have valid differing opinions, but I find Ginger extremely attractive. The beautiful face, the incredible figure, the charismatic personality. In the part she played, the fire when she was angry, the tenderness when she was sweet, the vulnerability when she was hurt. When she dances with Fred, I have a hard time taking my eyes off of her to watch how Fred is doing. I am not alone here. Not to be cruel, but Phyllis is not even in Ginger's league. So, yes, I have a great deal of sympathy for what Phyllis faced for the next 6 years, almost immediately after she married Fred. When Ginger first arrived in Hollywood, she had dated Mervyn LeRoy for a few years. She described it as mostly platonic, and then she seemingly dumped him. Whatever the case, he almost immediately married into the Warner family. Then she dated the terrible womanizer Howard Hughes for a while. In early to mid-1933, Ginger was told her next movie, Don't Bet on Love, for Universal, was with Lew Ayres. It was not a good part for Ginger, not a good movie, but she could have cared less. She was finally going to meet the imaginary lover she had been mooning over since 1930. I have not done a word count or anything like that, but I think the only man Ginger talks about more in her bio than Fred is Ayres. Here she recounts in detail his calling for a date and their first date. There was a lot of seismic activity that day, and when she talked with him on the phone, and later in the evening when she kissed him, the ground shook and Ginger swooned, taking it as a good omen. They started dating seriously immediately. The events that led up to their first movie together make no sense to me. Maybe it's me. Ballet-trained Dorothy Jordan, who had been Adele's understudy in Funny Face, was to be Fred's dancing partner. She then dropped out of the movie to go on her honeymoon with producer Marion C. Cooper. He disrupts his own movie. She gives up her first big-time role instead of putting off the wedding for a few months. I think perhaps that was the cover story. Ginger was on an extended 3-movie deal with RKO, and I believe had already won the contest to get Ginger to sign long-term. Her recent movies had done very well, so it made sense to put their rising star into their first big-budget musical. There's an interesting comment in Lucille Ball's biography, a different take on it all. She writes, Fred asked for Ginger, having helped her in New York with some of her dance routines in Girl Crazy. Ginger said in a 1937 Family Circle interview, when the picture was well underway, Fred sent for me. He wanted me in the dance sequences. Upon their meeting on the set, Fred's memory is all sunshine. Being old friends, we both had a good laugh when we met that first day of rehearsals. Ginger has a much different memory. She seems to have been very sensitive, long remembering slights, though to her credit she never seems to hold a grudge, at least for very long. She wrote, Fred looked the same but acted differently. He was not as open, far more formal. I felt like I didn't even know him. As if to explain his behavior, he said, I'm married now. From what I've seen, Ginger is one of those kissy-huggy people, both to men and women. I think perhaps he was setting a new boundary between them, so Phyllis would not be upset when the three of them were together. Not that it helped. Ginger finally met Phyllis a few weeks later. Ginger wrote, When we were introduced, she was a bit standoffish and greeted me as though she really didn't know who I was. I learned later that was the way she affected everyone. As was Ginger's way, and I believe in respect for Fred, she also said, I think she was somewhat insecure in her new role as a famous dancer's wife. Now there is an understatement. At first, I had a bad impression about Phyllis, not from Ginger's comments. She has her own prejudices, but from Fred. There are a few comments by both that leave me stunned, and this is one. Phyllis went to answer the front doorbell. She returned in a rather frightened state. She said, There's a dreadful man at the front door without a shirt on who says he knows your sister and that he's just been playing tennis. He wants to see you. The dreadful is not a typo. That is how Fred wrote it. Phyllis had a speech impediment. The intruder was David Niven, to become a lifelong friend, and Fred said he had us in stitches the entire time, so obviously Phyllis got over her scare. Still, of all the descriptions I could think of regarding Niven, dreadful is not one of them, and I cannot picture him doing something that so frightened Phyllis. Besides, he said he was friendly with Adele. Fred, of course, thinks this is fine, or else he would not have put it in his book. It seems to me to be really odd behavior, backing up some of Ginger's later statements. It helped in this first movie Fred and Ginger were friends and bandmates, not lovers. The only time together they were not lovers. From this point forward, they were friends who loved each other. That did not mean everything was just peachy keen all the time. Their careers and their personal lives were intertwined. Fred was a perfectionist when it came to the dance, and states several times he made his dancing partners cry. All but Ginger. In a 1986 interview, Fred said, "All the girls I ever danced with thought they couldn't do it, so they always cried. All except Ginger. No. Ginger never cried." In a later interview, Fred modified it to most every other girl.
When you have a dancing partner, there's always going to be a time that the girl is going to cry. Ginger didn't do that. But most every other girl that I worked with cried because they said they couldn't. "Oh, I can't do it," or something. "Oh, you can. Shut up. Get on, do it." And they do it.
I'm glad he modified it. There is no way he made the great Eleanor Pout cry. Ginger said she would never let them see her cry in this male-dominated industry. Not that she never cried. She does at times comment on how brutally exhausting preparing for the dance scenes could be, how dealing with Fred's perfectionism could be very trying.
Fred is quite a perfectionist. Fred Astaire is one of the most demanding of people, but...
Ginger always moderated what she said about Fred. Most did, because they loved Fred's Dr. Jekyll, the sweet pixie, as David Niven called him, so did not want to talk about his Mr. Hyde routine during dance practice. The funniest quote about this was by Artie Shaw, who did second chorus with Fred. About Fred's work ethic, Artie said, "Astaire really sweat. He toiled. He was a humorless Teutonic man." This was not an insult. Artie thought this was great. Fred agreed, describing himself in his biography as really bad-tempered, impatient, hard to please, critical. There are several anecdotal stories about this.
They had made 13 canes, and to try to get the long takes that he did, he would get mad and he'd break them over his knee.
While almost always humble and self-effacing, Fred loved to repeat quotes from Hollywood tough guys. James Cagney said to him, "You know you so-and-so. You've got a little of the hoodlum in you." At the end of Fred's biography, he writes, "I wanted to do all my dancing my own way, in a sort of outlaw style." Like a lot of guys, Fred likes to see himself as tough and a little bit of a rascal. That's okay. But there are no stories of Fred ever being mean or cruel. Just an obsessed perfectionist. Sorry, tough guy. Everybody thought you were a real nice guy. As to why the unnamed partners cried, where Ginger never did, there are no details, so one is left to theorize. Perhaps a frustrated outburst by Fred caused it. But it could just be exhaustion from the brutal rehearsing and shooting schedule, combined with demands for unreachable perfection. Fred never asked anyone to do anything he was not doing himself. He actually did more. And he was at least a decade older than all his partners. But they had never come through the vaudeville circuits like he and Ginger had in their youths, with the endless performances and rushing from venue to venue without a break. In Ginger, he had a partner who worked as hard as he did.
Gracious of him and very generous of him to say that. We both are perfectionists, and he loves everything to be precise, and so do I. And so we were always aiming for that one long take in one piece of film so that the whole dance would go in front of your face without a cut.
It was a good thing she was, because Fred worked on one thing, the dance, but worked on it obsessively.
Sometimes Fred would get home, he'd call me and say, "Well, do you think that one step is quite right? It doesn't seem to..." He said, "I really hate it." I said, "Well, if you hate it," I said, "we'll change it tomorrow."
Was he a bit of a worrier?
Oh. His sister, Adele, used to call him Moaning Minnie. He's famous for worrying.
Ginger said about Fred, "Sometimes he'll think of a new line of dialogue, a new angle for the story. They never know what time of night he'll call up and start ranting enthusiastically about a fresh idea. No loafing on the job and on the stair picture, and no cutting corners." And he would have Ginger arrive 5 a.m. the next morning to implement this. The most startling quote about this came from Ginger. She said they would both lose 15 pounds from the start of the dancing rehearsals till the end of the movie. She could not get her dresses fit correctly until later in the process than the dress designers needed because of this weight loss. Sounds a little crazy to me. I do not see how these two had 15 pounds to lose. Even if exaggerated, it is an indicator of how hard they worked. They got through it, and did so mostly with class. They both say most of the time they had a great time together. They both say they never really fought. But right from the start, issues arose that could have destroyed their relationship. That it did not is a credit to the both of them. Working so many movies together, others became part of their team and constant witnesses to their relationship. The most important is Hermes Pan, their mutual lifelong friend. Ginger had befriended Pan, as everyone called him, all the way back in her first Broadway play, Top Speed, 1930. In her bio, Ginger wrote Pan would prove to be a very important person in my life, and he was a darling friend. For their first movie together, Flying Down to Rio, Pan, an assistant dance director, was given an assignment that would change his life.
My first assignment, he said, Fred Astaire is up on stage 8, and said, would you go up there and said, see if you could do any help him, any help. And of course that frightened me to death, because even then Fred was a big internationally known star.
Pan was part of all their RKO movies, and afterwards teamed with Fred at MGM and whenever they could work together. Pan's contribution was more than all that. From so many anecdotal stories, he was the glue that held the team together, the perfect mediator between the two, because he was trusted, even loved, by both. And the threesome did remain friends for life. Ginger said in an interview in 1987, right after Fred's passing, "We were able to see each other at an Italian diner 3 or 4 times a year with our choreographer, Hermes Pan. We'd talk about old times and the things we had to laugh about. I trust Pan's take on things more than anyone else." I mean the supporting cast of their real-life story. Some will be quoted as we go along. Some have already been quoted. So let's get this out of the way now. Producer Pandora Berman was heavily involved, managed the team throughout this entire period, got along great with Fred, and supported and then protected Ginger several times. Ginger's mother Leela is a huge part of the story, always very close with her daughter, an amazing woman in her own right. Lucille Ball is Ginger's lifelong friend, got her start in the movies with the help of Ginger, and far more, Leela. Is a distant relative of Ginger, went out on double dates with her, and was around them throughout this period. Hal Bourne was their rehearsal pianist, the fourth important member of the team that created all these classic movies. And this story has one, at least from Ginger's viewpoint. No, not Fred's wife Phyllis. Ginger complained about her plenty, but always moderates it. Ginger is very consistent in her critique of directors, either heaping praise on them as wonderful or deriding them as terrible, part of the Boys Club, and in Mark Sandridge, who directed 5 of their 9 movies during their partnership period, Ginger had her ultimate nemesis. Fred not only got along with Sandridge, he praises him. Remember, if Fred had anything negative to say, he would keep it to himself. Fred wrote in his biography about the ingenuity of Pandora Berman and Mark Sandridge, and I was fully aware of their capabilities and my good fortune in being associated with them. Together, the threesome charted out the movies in exacting detail, minute by minute. Sandrich's movies are crisply directed, no lagging moments. This kind of perfectionist approach was right up Fred's alley. In her biography and in interviews, Ginger does have harsh words for some individuals, none more than Mark Sandrich. Ginger complains he constantly tormented her, flat out insulting her one time.
I had a director by the name of Sandrich, Mark Sandrich, and he said to me, "Ginger, why don't you take singing, dancing, and acting lessons?" And here I am working in movies for him. I thought it was very rude.
Ginger criticizes Sandrich as just part of the boys' club that ran the industry. Mark worshipped Fred's genius and thought he was the greatest thing since 7-Up. I was dismissed as a little bubblehead. He really tried to cut me down to size. The first issue that arose was Ginger's dancing. Later in life, Fred said, Ginger had never danced with the partner before flying down to Rio. She faked it an awful lot. She couldn't tap, and she couldn't do this and that. But Ginger had style and talent, and improved as she went along. She got so that after a while everyone else who danced with me looked wrong. Only the first part of that statement held true in 1933. Ginger said she was the only one at RKO that could dance with Fred. You gotta love her courage and confidence. Dance with the greatest dancer on the planet, even though I never had any dance training, even though I never did this kind of dancing before? No problem. Just show me what you want me to do. This must have driven Fred nuts. Ginger never had any dancing lessons. Never had any acting or singing lessons either. Later this became a point of friction between her and director Mark Sandrich, something she became very defensive about later in life.
I didn't take acting, I didn't take dancing, I didn't take singing, and then, I did all those things. So sue me.
This is all so silly in so many ways, covered more in depth elsewhere. Their karaoke dance was so loved by the public it launched their extended string of movies. But the dance professionals fret about Ginger's lack of training. Just another example of the great divide between public and Hollywood professionals' viewpoint. Ginger had no dancing lessons? What do you call 6 weeks of intensive practice before each movie? And by the master of dance. By their 5th movie, if not before, most dance pros admit Ginger had developed into a fine dancer, and books by dance professionals discuss what Ginger brought to their dances better than anyone else, acting while dancing. Yet to this day you see articles declaring Ginger could not dance. Absurd. Ginger finally signed a long-term contract with RKO. She had freelanced through the studios for an amazing 23 appearances since 1931. RKO had long treated her better, gave her better roles than any other studio, so this is no surprise. I wonder how much of her decision was affected by Fred having signed, and the opportunity to do a big-budget musical with him. The issues heated up for their second pairing. While Fred never aired his dirty laundry in public, in private he had big issues being partnered with Ginger again in Gay Divorcee and afterwards. In private, though, Fred was quite blunt about his position. In a telegram to his agent, Leland Hayward, Fred wrote, "What's all this talk about me being teamed with Ginger Rogers? I will not have it, Leland. I just managed to live down one partnership, and I don't want to be bothered with any more." Can you blame him? Ginger didn't, and defends Fred's reasoning in her biography. He had been teamed with Adele for so long that he feared being identified, yet again, with any one female. The always defensive Ginger then also defends herself. As to why Ginger became so defensive later in life is a story for another time. While I could sympathize with his feelings about being teamed with me, I, on the other hand, had no apprehensions about making more films with him. Why should I? I had an opportunity to appear in non-musicals by myself. For every film I did with Fred Astaire, I did 3 or 4 without him. Our partnership was a limited one only in his case, not in mine. Fred didn't have this luxury. He was a musical comedy star, period. The elephant in the room that nobody talks about, though, was Phyllis wondering why Fred had to do 9 of his first 11 movies with his ex-girlfriend. Phyllis's increasing and disruptive presence on the set speaks volumes, though. This had to be a factor in Fred not wanting to be teamed up with Ginger.
I went through a lot of hell getting them to make picture after picture for various reasons. Fred did not want to work with Ginger in her first picture because she wasn't an English girl in Gay Divorce. I persuaded him that the American audience didn't give a damn. They liked her. He didn't want to work with her in his second picture because he certainly didn't want to carry the team to another one. And that thing just went on and on and on.
I don't think anybody wants to get teamed up. You know, I was teamed up with my sister for years. I always used to say, what am I going to do when she decided not to, and she decided not to, so I went off alone, and when I am, I get teamed up with Ginger Rogers.
I solved it really by getting the company to give him a new contract, which gave him 10% of the profits. And after he got that first few checks from the profits, his reluctance to work with her evaporated.
Finally, the big day came for Ginger. She was marrying Ayers. Commenting on the dating period, Ginger wrote, "Lou is everything I imagined him to be." Covered in the documentary series, Ginger had many unusual stories in her life, and this is one of the weirdest. Her agent Leland Hayward came to ride in the limo with Ginger to her wedding, but he had his own agenda in doing this. On the ride, he besieged Ginger to marry him, not Ayers, and pressured her the entire ride. I always wondered why she did not fire him after that. Believe it or not, that is not the weirdest part. Hayward was in the middle of a 3-year relationship with Katharine Hepburn at the time. This event might have been part of the reason for Hepburn's seeming animosity towards Ginger at RKO. There are no mentioned issues in the making of Roberta. Maybe it helped that, at least during the first part of the movie, Ginger's character could be a terrible bitch. Bet Phyllis liked that. Instead, Ginger's comments about this movie back up other claims that they loved doing these dances together, that they had a real good time in doing so. Their first dance, I'll Be Hard to Handle, is one of their best fun dances of the series, and seems very spontaneous. Ginger wrote, "Fred and my laughter and giggling as we got into the throes of the dance were not added either. They were real. The two of us enjoyed dancing together. The spontaneity was very real, and it makes me laugh when I see it today." Roberta was the calm before the storm. Many things, both good and bad, occurred during the making of Top Hat. One was so serious it could have led to the end of their friendship. Did they fight? Here they surely did. But did they fight otherwise? Fred and Ginger repeatedly state they had a good working relationship, and the body of evidence supports that. Others say they fought all the time. In Lucy's biography, she says they battled through every picture. Here Fred explains.
That feeling built up into a rumor at one stage that you didn't actually get on with her.
Oh, Pandro Berman will say that we fought, but we didn't.
Pandro does say this arguing went on and on and on.
But did we argued about something, which you do with anybody you're working routine dances with, but we never had any cross arguments to that. And she would say the same thing.
And she does. They both do. In too many interviews to list here. In 1979, Fred said, "There was no time to fight. We worked too hard. I swear to you we never fought. We used to laugh so damn much that we broke ourselves up all the time in the middle of a dance." In 1980, he said, "We never had any fight. I keep saying it and saying it. We just used to laugh about it. And we still do." In 1976, showing their frustration with this stupid question, Ginger said, "I would like to squash this whole thing once and for all. We are both so tired of defending ourselves over these boring rumors about a feud that never has existed. I love Fred, and he loves me." See, right there. They love each other.
It's funny because the studio, I guess, wanting to cook up some things about us for the newspapers, would cook up these terrible things, and we'd read about them. And we'd look at them in the paper and say, what was that for? Who did that? We'd find it was up in the publicity department that had started all of this about our fighting. It was terrible. We've done nothing but try to live it down ever since.
I love Ginger's reply to this question. The BBC reporter asked Ginger, "Why did the RKO publicity department say you hated each other? Why not just say you were romantically involved?" Ginger replied, "Because they would have been shot by Mrs. Astaire." The kicker, though, was usually reserved Fred blowing his top over this. I know of only 2 times Fred lost his cool in the public arena, and this is one. In a 1987 BBC interview, shortly before his death, Fred said, "I used to keep my eye on Ginger. Always the worrier, he worried about his baby." So in a 1976 interview, the idiot Esquire reporter suggested the general public believes he hates Ginger Rogers. Fred furiously responded, "I don't give a damn. Not true. Not a word of truth." Fred refused to answer any further questions and had the reporter escorted from his home. Yeah, Fred looked after his baby. So they had one big fight, but refused to characterize their long, loving relationship by that one event. I am sure Lucy and Pandro are right. Working that hard, that long, and under some external pressures, they would argue sometimes. Not hard to imagine Ginger blowing up in frustration and exhaustion with Fred's perfectionism, or Fred becoming frustrated with Ginger's suggestions. He often said, "Oh, Ginger, she always wanted to be the boss." But they remained friends, regardless of all the pressures and obstacles. Their actions over the long years after their partnership prove it, as you will see. Top Hat, their highest-grossing movie ever, which many consider their greatest movie ever, is also when several serious issues arose in their partnership. Very uncharacteristic for Fred, in his biography he had a few laughs at Ginger's expense, regarding her fighting against a script that became one of her most financially successful movies, Bachelor Mother. Ginger being Ginger, she gets even here, but she also explains a very difficult situation she and Fred had to endure, and how it affected the movies they made. I must note here Ginger's biography was published in 1991, 4 years after Fred's passing in 1987. I believe she waited to tell her version till then, not wanting to offend Fred. Ginger wrote, "Fred had a strong negative reaction when he first read the script. He wrote a handwritten 3-page letter outlining his objections, saying in part, 'As this book is supposed to have been written for me, with the intention of giving me a chance to do things that are more suited to me, I cannot see that my part embodies any of the necessary elements, except to dance, dance, dance. I cannot see that there is any real story or plot to this script. The lead into Cheek to Cheek is hopeless as presently designed. The fact that Rogers slaps me in the face in 2 different episodes is certainly wrong. This was part of a pattern, though, and Ginger says, Mrs. Astaire exerted pressure on her husband, subtly or unconsciously. She would come on the set with her knitting and sit on the sidelines clacking her needles. I found her presence disconcerting, especially during dialogue takes. Fred was uneasy at these times, too. One thing's for sure, she never warmed up to me, and she surely didn't want her husband to, either. Fred said he couldn't stand mushy love scenes, and felt like a fool kissing for the camera. Frankly, I think Phyllis didn't want him kissing other women. When a script was released to Fred, the 2 of them would huddle over it for a few hours. Then he'd march down to the producer's office with a dozen reasons why it would be better if the protagonists never clinched. Thus, there were no love scenes with the leading lady. This was nuts. Making these movies must have been hard enough. They had to also endure Phyllis sitting there, constantly reminded of her presence by the loudly clicking knitting needles, seething about that Ginger bitch. Phyllis should have been sent home. On the one point, though, Fred's shyness did make him very uncomfortable doing intimate romantic scenes. Here is a good story coming out of the movie, but once again, it is one of my theories, not proven fact. If I am right, here Fred is taking care of his partner and improving the movie. Ginger writes that Fred did not want to sing the Piccolino, so she got to sing it. This happens again in Carefree, where Fred refuses to sing the Yam. There are commonalities to these 2 events. Sandrich is the director, Berlin the composer, and if Fred did not discard these songs, Ginger would have had no songs in these movies. This is nuts. Ginger was very popular, and her singing was fine for plays and movies. She had won the first Best Song Oscar. Her fan base would not have easily accepted her being silenced. As to Fred not liking the Piccolino, that's funny. He had no problem recording it for the radio. It is his version that hit the top 10. So let's get this straight. Fred revered the great composers. He was friends with Berlin. They socialized away from the movies. He used to play cards with Berlin. But Fred is going to announce to the entire set that Berlin's song sucks so bad he refuses to sing it? Ginger writes Fred told Pandro Berman, I hate that song. Give it to Ginger. I don't think so. Berlin must have been in on this. Fred went to Berman, not Sandrich, to dump this song. Maybe Berman was in on it also. Several times Berman went out of his way to defend Ginger, ultimately calling Sandrich to task over his treatment of Ginger. Ginger does not make it clear when this occurred, but several times she repeats that Sandrich said to her, Ginger, why don't you take some dancing, singing, and acting lessons? I just cannot understand what Sandrich thought Ginger was doing so wrong, and why he would feel the need to say something like this. For what purpose? To what benefit? Was he oblivious as to how well these movies were doing, and how much the public loved Ginger? Did he believe they would do better with another actress? What I am suggesting here is that, as director, twice Sandrich cut out Ginger singing. Fred, Berlin, and Berman did not want to get in a fight with him over this, but they knew this was a bad decision, so Fred declared he hated the song, and they just had to comply. Maybe they never told Ginger because when, not if, she exploded at Sandrich, she would not spill the beans. And the explosion was soon to occur in this movie. Ginger loves clothing. In her biography, she devotes pages and pages to describing the gorgeous dresses she wears in the movies. She cared about the color, even though the movies were in black and white. Ginger was a fashion trendsetter, both for clothing and hairstyles. She stated ostrich feather sales skyrocketed after Top Hat. She later had her own clothing line with JCPenney. Costume designer Bernard Newman had created the dresses for Roberta, and was Ginger's favorite designer, and worked with Ginger in future movies. Ginger said unlike a lot of designers, Bernie was open to suggestions. Ginger described the dress she wanted for the cheek-to-cheek dance, so she was deeply invested in this unusual dress. They had procedures to approve dresses beforehand, and the image had been presented, but the dress was late and not actually seen until the day of the shoot. It fell through the cracks. Fred and Ginger's account of the feather dress episode is in some ways very different from each other. As always, Fred totally skips the contentious points, but remembers the laughter afterwards. Ginger's version highlights the contention and her ultimate victory and vindication. When the dress arrived, Sandrich immediately came to Ginger's dressing room. Ginger believes this was at Fred's insistence. He told Ginger he wanted her to wear the dress she wore in The Gay Divorcee. This is nuts. Top Hat had a $609,000 budget in 1935. Millions today. Yet Ginger is going to rewear an old dress? Ginger called Mommy. Leela Rogers was a stage mother like none I have ever heard of, because she was accomplished in her own right, a scriptwriter for Hollywood, walked away from that when she got married and became a newspaper critic, and then walked away from that and her marriage to be her daughter's manager, guiding Ginger to her incredible success. When Ginger signed with RKO, Leela also got a job, running a training studio for the young actors. This was not a no-show job. Producers, directors, and talent scouts, some from as far away as New York, would attend the plays Leela produced to see what new young star they could find. Other studios sent their talent there for training. Leela was an influential force in her own right. Like Fred, Ginger likes to portray herself as tough. So many facts, as told by Ginger, do not bear that out. Yes, she did fight the studios over pay and treatment of actresses. She was an early feminist force, but it seems she stood behind Leela, who carried the fight. Lucy wrote Ginger was a sunny, cheerful person, friendly and approachable as a puppy. Ginger writes how she had others fight her fights, and by others, she mostly means Leela. So Leela, already at the studio, rushed over to defend Ginger. Ginger wrote, "My 105 pounds couldn't have gotten me through the first round without her." I found this reference to size funny. People did refer to Ginger as little at 5'4", 105 pounds, but Leela was even smaller. It's not the size of the dog, it's the fight in the dog. Ginger must have seen Leela as a giant. It was Ginger and Leela facing 10 studio executives plus Sandrich. They had brought down the Gay Divorcee dress, and it was soiled and stretched. Sandrich now suggested any other used dress. Leela blew up. "Why don't you just get another girl?" Leela grabbed Ginger's hand and they stormed out of the studio. An assistant director ran after them, saying Sandrich suggested they do one rehearsal with the feather dress. Faced with possibly losing one of their top stars, they put their misogynistic games aside. Leela won the day for Ginger. This victory would have been sweeter, though, if the damn dress didn't fall apart, according to Fred and others. Ginger downplays this. She said she and Fred were both tense as they started dancing. Some of the feathers did flutter and annoy Fred. He muttered to himself as he plucked the feathers off his tailcoat. Fred's version starts here, and he tells a much different story, a funny version, and maybe like many good stories, it exaggerates a bit. Fred wrote, as they started to dance, feathers started to fly as if a chicken had been attacked by a coyote. I never saw so many feathers in my life. It was like a snowstorm. They were floating around like millions of moths. I had feathers in my eyes, my ears, my mouth, all over the front of my suit. Fred wrote that take after take was stopped by the blizzard of feathers and of furious efforts to shake out the dress. It got to be funny after a while. The news went all over the lot that there was a blizzard on the Top Hat set. The sightseers poured in on us. Fred's lifelong friend, David Niven, wrote he and Phyllis were watching all this. Phyllis said they had to leave. Fred would be very embarrassed.
That's the one that we had so much trouble with her dress. The dress was beautiful, but it was all very fine ostrich feathers. They moved beautifully. Fred would throw her up in the air, and then she'd fall on the back again, Ginger. And then through the step, feathers would sort of drift up and fall in the face or fall in front of the camera and say, well, all right, take it again. And Fred was about to lose his mind. He said, this damn dress.
I had to be a little bit interested in what the women had, if I could get a hold of it. And sometimes you get a hold of the back of it or something, and I didn't want something that didn't work right. There were feathers in one thing that used to fall off a lot. That caused a lot of trouble.
He found that the feathers were getting all over his tuxedo, and you couldn't see them. I mean, I dare you to see it if you run the film. What you can see is the feathers coming off as I dance. You see them float, but you don't see them on his clothes. But he saw them on his clothes, and he was furious. He didn't want his tuxedo. And I guess I couldn't blame him, but I had designed the dress, and I was going to wear it, and I did.
Fred said it finally settled down, and at the end of the shoot, Fred and Pan sang a parody to Ginger to the tune of Cheek to Cheek. Fred wrote the rushes the next day were good, and very few of the feathers could be seen. Ginger remembers it differently. After the first take, Fred's attitude was still cool and aloof, but Mark was not taking his losing with any grace. During the rushes the next day, nobody spoke to Ginger or acknowledged her presence. It continued on the set, Fred cool and aloof, Mark stiff and businesslike. Only now did their stories come together. 4 days later, Ginger received a gift from Fred, a gold feather for her charm bracelet. The note said, "Dear Feathers, I love you, Fred." Fred wrote, "We laughed about that episode for weeks afterward. It was sort of a running gag with Ginger and me. I used to call her Feathers." Years later, in Easter Parade, Fred would do a comedy routine with Judy Garland, wearing a shedding feathered gown. I'm a huge fan of Ginger, but I have to admit some of the clothing, and, even worse, hairstyles she wore, baffle me. If I had been standing there with Fred when the dress first appeared, I also would have been shocked. What the hell is that thing? Like Fred, I could not have seen what Ginger did, how the way it flowed as they danced would be so beautiful and enhance the scene. Ginger was right. This fight was so serious, regardless of Fred's downplaying it, because it brought into conflict their two great passions, and also brought to the forefront Ginger's simmering frustration with how she was being treated. To Fred, all that mattered was the dance. He obviously did not see how effective it would be, only how it would harm the scene. To Ginger, it was more than even the dress. She had been granted the right to choose her own dresses as an important contributor to these movies, and now there was no way they were taking this away from her. Ginger comments with pride on how this or that idea was hers, like the end of "Isn't it a lovely day to be caught in the rain?" Or more importantly, the lifts at the end of "The Yam" and dancing in roller skates to "Let's call the whole thing off." Fred claims everything had to be his way regarding the dance, but the truth was he let Ginger contribute often. Ginger said his reaction was always no at first, but then he would agree. I can see her beaming with pride that she was treated as more than just a chorus girl. They got through this, their worst fight, and resumed their friendship. You gotta know by now Ginger melted when she got that charm from her Fred. Sandrich, on the other hand, just continued to seethe. Sometimes their behavior towards each other is, well, odd. In 1981, Ginger's foreword was added to Fred's bio. It starts off like many forewords, reminiscing about some event, but then, I kid you not, Ginger starts an argument with Fred. She complains about Fred's section in the book having a little fun about Ginger refusing the eventual great movie of hers, bachelor mother. Fred wrote, she never did agree she was wrong, and Ginger demanded she did. Then she adds, didn't the feather dress turn out superbly, contrary to your on-the-set evaluation when I first wore it? And Fred allowed this to be the foreword for his book. I still get a chuckle out of this. We already heard about Fred's temper, breaking 12 of 13 canes shooting top hat, white tie, and tails. Ginger had never seen his temper until the end of Top Hat. Sandridge insisted on adding an impromptu dance to the end, which upset Fred and Ginger without planning or practice. On the second pivot, Fred's top hat fell off. Fred stopped in his tracks, his hands flew up into the air, and his head shook. No, no, no. Fred walked to the wall of the set and kicked it, 5 direct hits. Fred had never displayed his temper to us before. I stared at him unbelievingly until I saw what his tantrum was all about. He had failed to put on his toupee before shooting. Fred was just humiliated. He was never seen without his toupee, but he was wearing the hat, and pissed at the last-minute addition. I must add, if Ginger never saw Fred's temper till the end of the 4th movie, then it must not have happened very often. Good to know he was not losing his marbles on a regular basis. Both events happened in Top Hat. Maybe it was all getting to him. Phyllis, Ginger, Sandridge, all these extraneous conflicts. This whole thing was a warrior's worst nightmare. We now hit an extended period without any reported conflicts. That is the way with many bios, discussing situations when they started, and then, if again, when they ended, skipping any monotonous repetition in the middle. Still, things truly seemed to settle down. Oh, they were little things, like another Ginger-designed dress episode in Follow the Fleet. This dress I do find gorgeous on her, but it was so heavily beaded it weighed 25 pounds, and at that weight it became the third dancer out there. It would swirl and take Ginger with it. In one twirl, the heavy sleeve smacked Fred in the face, dazing him. No conflicts arose, and again, it is a beautiful addition to the scene. Fred's home life was happy. He and Phyllis avoided most parties, liked to stay at home alone, or with just a few friends. They had their first child, Fred Jr. Ginger discusses how wonderful her married life with Ayers was, until. Ginger starts off a chapter with, at this point in my professional life, I was number 3 at the box office with Fred, but with Lou, at home, I was 0. Ginger so wanted a conventional marriage, wanted her husband to be the man of the house, make the decisions, control the finances. What did Ginger know of marriage? Not much. Her father was gone before she could remember. She did have a stepfather for a few years, from when she was 9 through 14, and she loved that period. She took his last name as her stage name. I read an unattributed quote that someone who supposedly knew Ginger well said she was emotionally immature. For many of the things Ginger says, that rings true. Both Fred and Ginger were child stars, and considering the sad history of that group, these two came out of it very well, but not unaffected. Ginger dreamed of the classic marriage. Ginger had been dreaming of this with Ayers since 1930. Reality has a way of dashing dreams. Ginger was often ahead of her time, but with this, it was Lou that was ahead, and Ginger reacted negatively. He had insisted on a prenuptial agreement because, she says, he had been burned in his previous marriage. This bothered her terribly. She spends a page discussing why. She wrote it caused me to have doubts as to the depth of real love that lurked behind such a document, and I saw that I had unwittingly fallen into a pit of convenience. And then she, briefly, brings up the issue that caused problems in almost all her marriages, alcohol. Ginger despised drinking, but Lou loved the late-night parties. Ginger's first marriage, when she was only 17, March 29th, 1929, was to Jack Culpepper. It lasted only 4 months. Ginger wrote about their incompatibility, especially when he would come home full of firewater. For me, that was grounds for war. She says nothing further, but I assume they fought about this issue. In May 1936, she decided to leave. The marriage only lasted 18 months. This AP article, May 9th, 1936, says they were legally, amicably separated. Ginger often says she was married to Ayers for 6 years, and, while legally correct, it was over for good at this time. She tried to reconcile, and delayed, and then resisted finalizing the divorce for years. When she finally did, this is where the story comes from that Ayers threw her out. That is probably legalese. He did not contest, and she could not claim abandonment if she was the one who decided to walk out. The story in the Los Angeles Times the next day included a partial transcript, including Ginger describing how he continually criticized me, my friends, and my work, and how he told her to get out and go home to your mother. In the courtroom, she was photographed on the verge of tears here. I remember seeing another photo I cannot find again, where she was outright crying. I think this story is hiding another big point. Ginger claimed he criticized her work. On what basis? By the separation she had completed Top Hat and Follow the Fleet. Her career was booming. I think that was part of the problem. Ayers' career was not. I read a pathetic article about Ayers after the separation, claiming whenever a successful actor marries a big star actress, his career crashes. But now that he was free again, his career was picking up. He never reached the top, but did earn an Oscar nomination in 1948 for his role in Johnny Belinda. At the end of her bio, when authors wrap up the story, Ginger wrote, "Could anyone with such a wealth of friends and a rich life have any regrets?" But follows that with, "However, I do regret that my marriage to Lou Ayres didn't work out." Of all her many relationships, that was the only one that left her with regrets. She was stuck on this man her entire life, since she was 19. I have read that, at least several times, Ginger ran away from her life to be alone. I was glad when I came across this article as partial verification. What I do not get is the police searching after her. Did she not have the right to be alone? She did, unless there were concerns about her being really depressed, about her harming herself. Ginger knows she was lucky in life, that her complaining would not be well received. Fred always avoided the Hollywood social life. In time, Ginger did the same, regularly retreating to her Oregon ranch to get away from it all. Here is another of my theories. In interviews, Ginger would say she loved being married, and sounded so strange saying that. Then why were you a 5-time divorcee? In her bio, she does list her reasons, always the drink, and infidelity, and financial ruin. I think Ginger was a one-man woman, and that man was Lou Ayres. It caused issues in her relationships before she even met him. Except for Fred, nowhere else in her bio does she gush about a man like she does about Ayres. She tried so hard to reconcile, but then had to face reality, had to move on. I think all her subsequent relationships suffered from her truly loving one man, and one man alone. Mervyn LeRoy calls Ginger this in his bio. Catchy name, wordplay on a great movie, Bachelor Mother, and kind of fitting for this period in her life. No way I am going to cover all the men Ginger dated and married during this time. You have a few hours for that? Maybe I will cover it in another video sometime. She was seen out there, right away in the public, dating Jimmy Stewart. They dated on and off for years. To Ginger, her career was number one, and I assume one motivation was the publicity of her dating all these men, and to put on a brave face for her fans. Another, possibly, to make Ayres jealous, to show him how many men wanted her. But I also assume, after what she had been through, she also needed attention, to be told she was special. I have seen it stated, without corroboration, that Ginger was crazy about Stewart. Later she was engaged to Howard Hughes, with a gigantic ring and promise of a castle in the sky, but then she found out about his infidelity and, thank God, dumped him hard. Noah Dietrich, longtime Hughes employee, said, "It was the only time anyone saw Howard Hughes cry." In several quotes it was said Ginger, or Ginger and Katharine Hepburn, were the only women he ever loved. She dated Cary Grant, and gushes about what wonderful company he was. In 1952 he wanted to join Ginger on her European tour, but once again she had become suddenly married, upsetting him. Grant is another man Ginger muses about in terms of what might have been between them. About this time, Ginger wrote, "Cary was a wonderful date, one of the many terrific men I was seeing at the time." Another special beau was George Gershwin, adding later, "I was crazy about George Gershwin, and so was everyone who knew him." George had some interesting quotes about Ginger, but once again my notes let me down, so I have to paraphrase. In one comment, George said Ginger and Irene Dunne would make perfect wives. Guess he liked them Celtic girls. In another, he said Ginger loved everyone, but nobody that much. Out of character for Ginger, she also had a multi-year romance with director George Stevens, who was married with children, the only time I know of Ginger doing this. I think he took Ginger for a ride here. About it ending, Ginger wrote, "For a variety of reasons, it was not to be. I was still married, if in name only, and so was he." My guess at a translation, the classic story. He told her he was miserable in his marriage and would leave his wife, but never did for Ginger, and not until 1947. With all this running around with all these men, some crazy stuff happened, like being directed by boyfriend Stevens in Vivacious Lady, while smooching with co-star and boyfriend Stewart in front of the camera. Ginger did a lot of movies that matched her real life. In 1950, Ginger did Perfect Strangers, where her character falls in love with a married man with children. In the end, she does the right thing, sending her lover back to his wife and kids. She married 3 more times. She married an unknown actor and current U.S. Marine serving in World War II, Jack Briggs, from 1943 to 1949, again blaming alcohol for the breakup. She married boy toy Jock Bergerac, 16 years her junior, in 1953, and divorced in 1957, she says because of his infidelity. It seemed to be the rage at that time for aging big stars to marry younger men. Her last marriage was to actor, director, producer William Marshall in 1961. This was her worst choice of all. He boldly cheated on her and stole her money, her jewelry, and her Rolls Royce. Other accounts say this guy was a real creep. That was a quick run-through. It sure seems Ginger was really bad at choosing lovers. About most of these she declares she ended them with justification. Still, her inability to have that long-lasting, loving marriage she always dreamed of must have hurt her badly. Of course, Ginger must have played a part in her marriage troubles, but I just do not have any sources right now to even theorize about it. To me, sad. Just really sad. While the calm period extended, their movies, actually all musicals, were slipping in popularity, covered elsewhere. Maybe that was a factor in Fred agreeing to do this scene, to create some buzz about the movie, about his finally kissing Ginger. It might also have been in response to the audience not responding well to Fred's refusal to do so far. Actually, they had pecked at each other from time to time in their movies, just no passion to kissing. Ginger was frustrated. Talking about this event in her bio, she called herself the Great Unkissed Leading Lady. Whatever the case, Fred finally did so. Not a very long kiss, but because the entire scene was in slow motion, it does seem long. In a 1991 BBC interview, Ginger said, "We had that agreement, no kissing, so he could have a happy home life." After reviewing Ginger's complaints about Phyllis, this event suggests her jealousy and insecurity regarding Ginger had lessened, or even ended, by this time. Who knows? Maybe Fred told her he had to do it, and she had to accept. Subsequent research reveals later events that strongly suggest Phyllis did accept Ginger as a part of Fred's life. I assume they never became bosom buddies, but she, at the least, endured Ginger's presence, even, possibly, as a frequent guest in their home. Yet there is no guidance on this issue in either Fred or Ginger's bio. I had read articles about later events and just assumed they were gossip rag garbage because of this omission, until the preponderance of evidence proved they did occur. I stated earlier Ginger never held the grudge very long. Is this the exception? Could she never forgive Phyllis for her earlier troublemaking? Or is there more to this? I have no proof at all to surmise. I assume I know why Fred talks so little about Ginger in his bio, so soon after his wife's passing. Could Ginger, with her tumultuous and tragic love life, resented anything keeping her from her Fred? Who knows? Yet, on the same page Ginger complained about not being kissed, she confirms that Fred was terribly uncomfortable doing this scene. Watching the rushes the next day, Ginger says, "I laughed out loud. Fred moaned and squirmed, but, bless his heart, he wound up laughing too. How funny, I thought." Ginger being Ginger, though, she has to get a little dig in at Phyllis. On the same page, Ginger wrote, "Whether it had any bearing or not, Phyllis Astaire was not on the set when we shot this sequence." Nothing to support this, but did Ginger want the opportunity to gloat? Did this avoid a catfight on the set? The truth is, I could never have been married to an actress back then, because I would not want to deal with watching them kiss handsome man after handsome man. Never mind today, with all this soft porn scenes, heading rapidly towards XXX. Wouldn't that fit under the definition of justifiable homicide? Ginger's first movie after the partnership ended, Bachelor Mother, the one Fred wrote about Ginger refusing to do in his bio, was a huge success. Fred visited Ginger on the set of her next movie, Fifth Avenue Girl. Modern Screen magazine quoted Ginger, "Why should a simple desire to find out what we can do separately before people get so tired of seeing us together they won't want to see us in any form be interpreted as proof of a bitter feud? There has never been a feud, and we haven't broken with each other now. You, yourself, just saw Fred here. That ought to prove something or other." Fred, ever the moaning Minnie, worried about his career. Hermes Pan said, "It was a crisis for Fred when Ginger left. I mean, she just moved into another range and the public accepted her as a single. It used to make him furious." Fred was no fool. He had come to understand Ginger's great contribution, as he demonstrates in countless quotes over time. His first movie without Ginger, Broadway Melody of 1940, co-starring Eleanor Powell, is in so many ways a great movie, but it missed one thing: the acting. Eleanor was the female Fred, or, vice versa, Fred was the male Eleanor. They both were incredible dancers, but mostly only adequate actors. I cannot find revenue data, but this was Eleanor's last big movie, and that speaks for itself. Don't worry about Fred, the greatest song and dance man in movie history. He had to deal with an extended slump here, but he would rebound, again and again, until his legs grew too old for his heart. Ginger Rogers, Best Actress for Kitty Foyle, her 5th movie after their partnership. This was a big day for Ginger. If I had to choose one event by each proving they loved each other as friends, for Fred it would be the earlier described interview where, so out of character, Fred yelled at and then threw the Esquire reporter out of his house because she stated he hated Ginger. My hero. Her hero. For Ginger, it would be this event. Of course, her mother was there to share the moment with her. In telling the story, Ginger mentions several of the congratulations she received. Then she tells of the one she treasures most, actually sent a week before, predicting her win, and, most importantly, from her beloved Fred. Fred wrote, "Hello, cutie. Saw Kitty last night, and must write this note to say, that's it. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. You were superb, Ginge. It was such a solid performance. The kind one seldom sees on stage or screen, and it should bring you the highest honors anyone can win. Hope to see you soon. As ever your Fred." Many times Ginger seems to get parts that mirror her real life. In their reunion movie, The Barclays of Broadway, in 1949, Ginger's character is a great success in her opening night performance. Now in the dressing room, all she cares about is if her husband, Fred, who she is separated from, saw the performance, sent flowers or a telegram. From their bios, not much is said about their interactions in their post-partnership period. So much so I was startled at first with reports of their public appearances together. Ginger's bio had been dramatically cut down, so maybe all this ended up on the cutting room floor. Or maybe to them this was so, of course, it was not worth mentioning. Still, with all that Ginger said about Phyllis, it was surprising. There are multiple reports of one night at the Macombo Club in October 1942, where, it seems, Fred, Phyllis, Ginger, and Randolph Scott were out for the evening. About the evening, Photoplay reported, Fred Astaire posed for pictures with affable Ginger. In fact, the two indulged in so much earnest conversation, leaving Mrs. Astaire and Ginger's escort Randy Scott to chat alone, that gossip ran high that Ginger and Fred were discussing a new film to be made together. Fred and Ginger did talk, many times, about their next movie together. They both felt it important that it be great, not just good, and perhaps that hunt for perfection was part of the reason it never happened. They planned on producing it themselves, went so far as to get a script, but nothing came of it at the end. I still wonder why Ginger didn't, after all she said negative about Phyllis, ever state how eventually things calmed down enough for them to all socialize for an evening. Maybe it was part of her bio that was cut, or maybe this says more about Ginger than Phyllis. I have this quote from Fred's daughter Ava, confirming that Fred and Ginger were friends, but I have no date, so do not know if this was before Phyllis's tragic passing or after. By 1949, Fred's career had rebounded, big time. He had 2 nice movies with Rita Hayworth, but this was not the best of Rita, like her later sparkling performance in Gilda. He did 2 very successful movies as Bing Crosby's sidekick, but Fred did not like playing the supporting role. During this period, he did several all-time great dance scenes and danced with a variety of partners, which he always wanted, with mixed results. Then he retired, but was pulled back in when Gene Kelly was injured, and did Easter Parade with Judy Garland, a smash hit. Finally, Fred was teamed with an actress who could fill the role Ginger had, and it shows. Ginger had a great run during the 40s, and was the highest paid actor in Hollywood for several years. Some critics declare her Lady in the Dark, 1944, the beginning of the end of this period for her, but this movie is burdened by external agenda issues having nothing to do with the quality of the movie. They still had Ginger, who kept up her appearance so well, playing young girls when she was 35 years old, like in Heartbeat, 1946, and it was straining credibility. After the great success of Easter Parade, Fred was supposed to do The Barclays of Broadway with Judy Garland, but she had succumbed to her addictions again and was replaced by Ginger. They were finally to do that next movie they had talked so much about. They were about to do their last cinema dance. I mentioned earlier the sad stories of child stars, and Judy was one of the saddest. I will cover this entire story another time. Ginger goes into depth about a disturbing episode with Judy. Ginger had plenty of stories about conflict with others on sets. Besides Phyllis and Sandrich, she claims Irene Castle gave her a real hard time in The Story of Vernon and Irene Castle. There are others. Not sure what that says about Ginger. Still, this one is startling and sad. One day, Judy Garland came on the set. She looked daggers at me, as though it was my fault I, not she, was dancing with Fred. Though I had nothing to do with her being ousted, I could tell she blamed me for her dismissal. They took a few photos of Judy, Fred, and Ginger, and then Ginger was told she better go into your dressing room and wait until I call you. Judy is acting so strangely. I don't want you to get upset. Ginger concludes, in the end, she had to be physically removed from the set. I love The Barclays of Broadway, rated their 4th best movie. I have subsequently discovered not many share my opinion. Oh well. I love it because it is a what-if movie. What if Ginger had not run off to Hollywood and stayed safe on Broadway? What if David O. Selznick did not see Fred's great potential, regardless of the poor screen test? What if, as Ginger said, they became a more serious item, married, and starred together on Broadway? I would love to see the original script for Garland, to see how much was changed because now Ginger was starring in it, because it was the perfect what if they stayed together. Ginger got a call from MGM. The executive asked, would you have any objections to doing another film with Fred Astaire? Poor sucker walked right into a sore point with defensive Ginger. What kind of a question is that? She was irritated at the manner in which she was asked, felt it terribly ungracious to assume she wouldn't want to. She said, I would adore to make another film with Fred. She started working out right away to get back in shape to handle another round of intense dance practice. Fred said, it was hard for Gin and me to realize that nearly 10 years had passed since our last show together. It took an outsider to express the emotions of this reunion. Director Charles Walters said, I remember she came in while Fred was rehearsing. Up the aisle she came, and Fred stopped dead. They embraced, and I wept. If I was there, I would have cried also. They had 2 great dance numbers in this movie. One of their funnest dances in Bouncing the Blues. And one of their most passionate dances in They Can't Take That Away From Me, the only time they ever reused a song. I think Fred did some of his finest acting of his career in this movie, as the heartbroken husband losing his beloved wife. Don't worry, he doesn't lose her, but Ginger being Ginger, she torments him for quite a while. They had lost money, according to shady studio accounting, in the last 2 movies of their partnership. Here, they went out on top, with a very good movie that also had higher revenue than any movie either of them do after this, until Fred appears in The Towering Inferno 25 years later. Much of the story has been Ginger, because she said a lot more, and there are a lot of stories to tell. How many times can I repeat? And Fred was very happy with his family life. Well, he was very happy. Until. In the summer of 1953, for the first time since Fred had known her, Phyllis complained about not feeling well. She was fine the next day. Then again, worse, then better. Fred dragged her to a doctor. Everything was fine, until the x-rays came back. She needed immediate major surgery. Lung cancer. Before the surgery, she wanted to go to the stables to see a new foal. On the way back, she said to Fred, "I wonder if I'm going to die." During surgery, Pan and Niven, his closest friends, were with him. The surgery was declared a success, but then 5 hours later there was another surgery, this time with the grim prognosis. But she pulled through and started recovering. Through all this, Fred refused to believe he could possibly lose her. He took her again to the stables, saying, "You never thought you would be coming back here, did you?" She said, "I never would have if it hadn't been for you." A few weeks later, another setback, more surgery, and Phyllis lapsed into a coma. Fred wrote, "I knew she would snap out of it. She didn't. She looked like a beautiful child. She never lost her sweet facial expression. Phyllis slipped away from us at 10 a.m., September 13th, 1954. Life can be so cruel. Ginger's romantic life was a mess, but at least Fred had found someone he could love forever, who loved him. Why were these two doomed to live their personal lives alone and lonely? Even here, Mr. Understatement has so little to say. He wrote, "I tried to get out of my commitment, but the studio, Fox, prevailed upon me to do the picture. They would wait until I felt that I was ready." Fred had started Daddy Longlegs before Phyllis got sick. From multiple reports, he did not just try to get out of his commitment. He offered to reimburse the studio for all expenses so far in making the movie, to get out of it. Ginger says nothing I can find about Phyllis's passing. I assume this was out of respect. Fred had his say about this event, and nothing more needs to be said. After her earlier criticism and her seemingly holding a grudge against Phyllis, to say anything would be tasteless. I assume she privately expressed her condolences to Fred. Fred stayed unmarried until 26 years later, 1980, when he was 81 years old. I must modify something here. I colored my reporting of Phyllis based on Ginger's comments. That is too one-sided. Fred's bio is filled with comments about their life, how much she helped him, how much he trusted in her, and even some cute stories. The school had a mother's race, and Phyllis did some training. Fred was stunned when she immediately jumped out to a lead and won the 50-yard race by 10 lengths. He had no idea she had run track in school. Fred ends this section with, "Those were the wonderful days." And the dreadful Niven always lists Fred and Phyllis together as his close friends. In 1957, Ginger divorced her fourth husband, the boy toy Jacques Bergerac. I only mention this because of what I view as a very sad statement. Like Fred, Ginger often put the best spin on things, out of pride and discretion. But still. She says she was deeply hurt by his cheating on her, the cause of the divorce. She concludes, "The truth is, for a few lovely years, Jacques Bergerac was my knight in shining armor and, bless his heart, that's the way I'll always see him." Did Ginger expect so little for herself? Had she so given up on true lasting love she would satisfy herself with brief interludes? Was this as good as it was going to get for her? I have read, totally unattributed, that after Phyllis's passing, Ginger waited for a while for Fred to ask her to marry him. Maybe wishful thinking by some fan. Maybe wishful thinking by Ginger. They still got together in public sometimes, and when they did, they danced. Here they are dancing at the May 25th, 1974 world premiere of That's Entertainment. A 1975 American magazine clipping described a private party at which Fred and Ginger arrived separately but took over the dance floor together. Fred Astaire came with a friend we didn't know, but he danced with old partner, Ginger Rogers. But they were getting older, and the public appearances became less and less frequent. I read a long, interesting article by a professional dancer explaining why Ginger was Fred's best dancing partner. Overall, it was her flexibility and their intimacy. But for all the comments, that does not mean Ginger was Fred's best technical dancing partner. Many professional dance critics state she was the most effective because of her acting while dancing, her figure, other factors. For another time. Here, the dancer points out something else, the reason why I include it here. He wrote, Ginger is the only partner with whom Fred has virtually no respect for her personal space. I know, sounds strange. Bear with me. If you look at Fred's best partner dances with Hayworth, Charisse, Ellen, Chase, etc., again as a contrasting example, you'll see Fred resists his natural tendency to get as close to his partner's face and body as possible. Even in romantic dances with Hayworth, Charisse, and other fine partners, there is a personal space, or an airy formality and glamour to the scene. Fred is very, very careful with his supporting arms and legs. If his face comes very close to the woman's face, he hesitates, out of respect. There is a physical comfort between them, referring to Fred and Ginger. Ginger gives in to the sensuality of the dance by yielding to Fred's overtaking her, in a manner of speaking. It's a kind of physical conversation Fred and Ginger have that is so special. Let me say that it is also very, very rare, even by today's dance standards. The writer concludes, this is not to disparage the other fine, technically pure dancers Fred Astaire has danced with, because they are all beautiful. It's just a little exploration, from a dancer's point of view, of what makes Fred so chemical with Ginger. To me, the reason for this is because the shy, gentlemanly Fred could never imagine himself as the great movie screen lover with all the others. But Ginger, at the very least, he had that one passionate kiss in 1930. I suggest many more after that. And so with Ginger, he could see himself as her lover, and was so comfortable being intimate with her, even in front of the camera. This brings us back to where we started, the 1967 Oscars. I assume most did not see what I found surprising, Fred seeming so out of character. First he kisses Ginger's hand. Then, when she goofs, he takes her hand, pulling her close, and calls her my baby. Ginger beams. For Fred, ever shy and reluctant to show emotions and intimacy on the screen, this speaks volumes about their real relationship. Roberta Olden, Ginger's long-term, and last, assistant, said, Fred would send Ginger little notes in the mail, and she would send him postcards. I got to meet Fred several times. He was a very sweet man, and you could see that they had great affection for each other. There is such a bittersweet account from the 1982 RKO reunion. Sitting together, Fred and Ginger are seen talking into each other's ear, patting each other on the knees, kissing each other on the cheek, and nodding to each other in a kind of shorthand secret language. In several deeply touching moments, Ginger is seen helping Fred, who, at the age of 83, was having inner ear trouble and difficulty staying on his feet for long periods of time, by reminding him of who each celebrity was that continued to approach them to say hello. She does this carefully, before they say hello, so Fred is never embarrassed. It's remarkable. These are signs of not only an historically great dancing partnership, but also of a profoundly loving friendship. Fred passed away June 22nd, 1987, 88 years old. That night Ginger appeared on Nightline, and what she said was perfect, exactly how Fred would want to be remembered.
Lots of others who danced with him, but there was nothing ever to touch the magic of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. The two of you were perfection. And I frankly don't care if you liked each other or hated each other. I mean, you know, but on screen and when the two of you were dancing, you were just unbelievable. What was that chemistry?
Well, I'd like to correct a thought that is sort of prevalent in most of the minds of the public, that Fred Astaire and I were at each other's throats. We never were. And I always admired him from the very beginning, and he always accepted me with a great sense of charm and aplomb, and he always thought that I was right to do things. I think he wanted to make films with other leading women, and because he was at RKO, he had to make them with me. I was the only one there that could do the things that were necessary. But I adored him, and his talent is one that's going to live forever, and I think the centuries that come on, the youngsters will find they'll look to him for class, style, and charm, because he epitomizes it.
Ginger passed away April 25th, 1995, the end of an era. Fred and Ginger both had huge, successful careers, and the 10 movies they did together were just a small part of that. Yet the grandeur of what they created, and the effect on their industry, changing how dance musicals were made, is their most lasting legacy. I believe I have proved, beyond any doubt, most of their lives they were friends who loved each other. As to their early possible romance, that is for you to decide. I am not sure what happened either. Their lives were great. They were famous, rich, and adored. But they both suffered terrible heartbreak in totally different ways. Fred was happily married to the love of his life, and she was ripped away from him way too soon by cancer, and then he was alone for most of the rest of his life. Ginger spent way too much time in her life mooning over a man who possibly threw her out of his house after only 18 months of marriage, and she seems to have been lost after that. In an odd way, Fred was the only lover who stood by Ginger her entire life. So maybe what I'm about to reveal will not be that surprising. Hollywood actually has a pretty vibrant graveyard tourism industry, where you can get as close as you ever will to your favorite stars. Some of those graveyards are loaded with famous people's final resting places. There is one, though, Oakwood Memorial Park, the furthest from Los Angeles, that has many from the industry, but few stars. Fred and his family are buried there, each in separate graves. His sister Adele, just a few feet from his wife Phyllis, and his mother. I assume other family members. There are only 2 famous stars buried at Oakwood, and the other is Ginger. She is buried with the one loving constant in her life, her mother Leela. The end of the story would be better if they were buried closer, but not too close. Always with each other, but never the center of each other's lives. But in a way, they have the place to themselves, and just each other. When you call up the map, these are the only 2 with preset location markers. Even in their passing, they stand alone, a unique story in the industry. The 2 of them knew, for a long time, that they would spend forever together here. For those of you who have stuck by me this long, I thank you. I hope it doesn't come to this, but if the possible upcoming movies are sensationalist garbage, trashing the reputations of these 2, let this defend their legacy. Please like and subscribe.